I'll just be upfront about it. I'm a middle-aged man stuck in a marriage that's falling apart. My wife and I argue constantly about absolutely everything. I honestly can't even recall what set us off this particular time, most likely something trivial. Either way, it ended with me storming out of the house, which has become far too common. Normally, when things get like this, I book a hotel room. This time, though, I didn't want her tracking me down. So I chose a different solution. I own a property out in the middle of nowhere that I've been intending to repurpose someday. I think it might have once been a shooting range, or something along those lines. I'm not entirely sure. The previous owner passed away, and his estate just wanted the land gone. The structure itself is an odd concrete block building with a few warehouse-style rooms on the ground floor and an office space upstairs. Despite only having a handful of rooms, it's surprisingly large. I figured it would be a good place to spend the night. There was no chance my wife would find me there. The drive took about 20 minutes along roads that became more barren the farther I went. Roughly halfway through, I noticed heavy clouds gathering overhead. By the time I arrived, distant thunder was already rolling. I pulled into what used to be a parking lot just as rain began to fall. I keep an extra set of keys hidden behind a loose panel of siding, which I found without much trouble. As I got inside and settled, the storm intensified dramatically. The roof is made of metal, and the rain was pounding so hard, it sounded like someone was dumping gravel overhead. There's a reasonably comfortable cot in what I assume was once the upstairs office, and that's where I planned to sleep. Once I lay down, I felt calm for the first time in weeks, even with a storm raging outside. The sound of rain was oddly comforting, making the building feel isolated from the rest of the world. Naturally, that peace didn't last. Just as I started drifting off, the crash of breaking glass cut through the storm. My heart began racing instantly. I stayed completely still for about 30 seconds, straining to listen past the rain hammering the roof, trying to determine where the sound had come from. I keep a hunting rifle stored in one of the nearby rooms, mostly because I don't want my wife knowing I own it. I retrieved it as quietly as possible and carefully descended the stair. At the bottom, I paused, listening for anything other than the storm. There was nothing, only the relentless rain. I decided to sweep the entire building carefully. I moved from room to room, rifle raised, checking every corner and closet. In one of the back rooms, I found the source. A boarded-up window had been punched through with shards of glass scattered across the floor inside. That was all, though. There were no signs of entry, and the opening was far too small for anyone to crawl through. Even so, paranoia settled deep in my gut. I spent another 20 minutes checking the entire property, but nothing else seemed disturbed. Eventually, I convinced myself it was probably just vandals who tossed a rock and ran once they heard the glass shatter. I found some cardboard in another room and taped it over the hole before heading back upstairs. I kept the rifle beside the cot just in case, though I was fairly sure whoever did it was long gone. I'm not certain how much time passed, maybe an hour, when I heard what sounded like footsteps below me. It was faint over the rain, but it seemed deliberate, like someone moving slowly and quietly under cover of the storm. I grabbed the rifle again and eased toward the top of the stairs, deciding not to risk going down and giving myself away. The footsteps had stopped, though there was no way whoever was down there could have heard me. I stood frozen for about 5 minutes sweat starting to bead on my forehead. Once again, I searched the building, and once again, I found nothing. I began to wonder if I was imagining things, or if someone had slipped out unnoticed. That theory didn't make much sense, considering every door was still locked. This time, I stepped outside into the heavy rain and walked the perimeter, using my phone's flashlight. There were no vehicles, no footprints, no indication anyone had been there at all. The lack of evidence was unsettling. Part of me almost hoped to find something, just to prove I wasn't losing my mind. Back upstairs, I tried to reason through it. Between rain slamming into the metal roof and the way old buildings groan during storms, there were plenty of innocent explanations for strange noises. I told myself I was just on edge and tried to fall asleep. But it didn't stop there. Before I could even settle again, I heard a sound unmistakably like furniture being dragged across the floor beneath me. This wasn't ambiguous. A storm doesn't produce the heavy scrape of something solid being pushed across concrete. Not ever. I didn't hesitate this time. I grabbed the rifle and rushed downstairs, flipping on every light switch as I went. Fear had given way to anger, which felt easier to handle. I shouted into the empty rooms that I was armed, that I wasn't playing games, and that I was prepared to defend myself and my property. My voice echoed through the building and faded into silence. Nothing had been moved. No one responded. You might wonder why I didn't call the police then. Part of it was not knowing what I'd even say. But more than that, the property is far from being up to code. And that's putting it mildly. The last thing I wanted was official attention drawn to the place. Standing there alone, rifle in hand, yelling into the darkness, something changed. In an instant, my anger vanished and was replaced by an overwhelming, icy fear. It wasn't just an emotional shift. It felt physical, like a cold wave washing over me. Every instinct I had screamed that I needed to get out of there immediately. I don't know what caused it, but I knew I couldn't stay. I gathered my belongings, returned the rifle to its hiding spot, and shut off all the lights. The storm was still raging, but I didn't care. I locked the building and drove home through the worst of the weather. It's been some time since then, and I plan to return in a few days, or whenever I get the chance. I want to investigate further. Maybe install some sort of security system to determine whether something is actually happening there, or if it was all in my head. As for what truly happened that night, I honestly don't know. Either someone was there and managed to avoid me completely, or I'm beginning to lose my sanity. I'm not sure which possibility is more frightening. I try not to think about any other explanation, because that thought terrifies me even more. This happened to me a few weeks ago, and even though I want to believe it's over, I have a strong feeling that it isn't. I don't live deep in the woods, but my house sits on the edge of what I'd describe as a nature-heavy suburb. There are tons of trees, wildlife, and open space around. One side of our property backs up against what could technically be called a small forest, though it's really more of a wooded strip. From our backyard, it's only about a quarter mile through those trees to another road on the opposite side. That road connects to a different neighborhood, and beyond it lies a massive body of water that has always fascinated me. When I was younger, I assumed it was a reservoir. There are no trespassing signs everywhere, along with signs marking it as government property, all lining the fence that surrounds it. But here's the strange part. There's no name for this supposed reservoir listed on Google Maps or Apple Maps. which doesn't make sense because real reservoirs are always labeled. I've searched for information about it countless times over the years and never found anything official. It's been a frequent topic of discussion between my siblings and me because of how mysterious it is. I run varsity cross country for my school, so I'm constantly looking for good places to train. That wooded area has become my favorite route. It's a perfect 2-mile loop that cuts through the trees, runs alongside the road by the water, and circles back. It's much quieter than running through my neighborhood, which has no sidewalks and narrow, winding roads where drivers go way too fast. With the season coming up, I had recently increased how often I was running. On the day everything started, I could have sworn I heard movement behind me while I was heading back through the woods after finishing my run. I brushed it off, assuming it was just an animal. Later that night, things took a turn. During the summer, I always sleep with my windows open. I love hearing nighttime nature sounds, especially during storms. And that night, the rain was intense. A few hours after I got home, a massive thunderstorm rolled in without warning. It was incredible. I was lying in bed. Listening to the rain and thunder as I started to fall asleep, when I noticed a sound that didn't belong. It was faint at first, but persisted. It sounded like quiet crying, soft sobs. The longer I listened, the more certain I became that it was coming from directly beneath my bedroom window, and worse, it sounded unmistakably human. Any doubt that the storm was causing it disappeared when I heard a woman's voice cut through the rain. Clear as day, she said, "Can you help me? I'm cold." I've never reacted so quickly in my life. It was pure instinct. Before fear could even register, I jumped out of bed, ran through the house, burst out the front door, and sprinted around the side toward my bedroom window. The rain was coming down so hard that I was completely soaked almost immediately. But I didn't care. As terrifying as the voice was, it never crossed my mind that something bad was happening. I only thought that someone needed help. When I rounded the corner, I saw her. A woman dressed in white, maybe a nightgown or a dress, was crouched beneath my window, huddled as close to the small overhang as she could get. I approached carefully and asked if she needed help. The whole scene felt unreal, like something out of a dream. But within seconds, everything escalated. The moment she noticed me, she shot to her feet and charged straight towards me with a sudden burst of energy I wasn't expecting. I barely had time to brace myself. But just before reaching me, she hesitated. Maybe because of my height, I don't know. And instead of hitting me, she abruptly veered off and ran toward the woods. I stood there stunned as she vanished into the darkness, moving impossibly fast for someone barefoot. I didn't chase her. I went straight back inside, drenched, and woke my dad. After I told him what happened, he was just as shaken as I was. We double-checked every door and window to make sure they were locked. We considered calling the police, but it was already past midnight, and we figured she'd be long gone by the time they arrived. Searching the woods during a thunderstorm also seemed pointless and dangerous for anyone involved. We agreed to wait and deal with it in the morning, if needed. I eventually managed to fall asleep, and the next few days passed without incident. My dad and I convinced ourselves it had probably been either a homeless person seeking shelter or someone experiencing a mental health crisis. But that night wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. About a week later, I was out on one of my regular runs. As I approached the road that connects near the water, I glanced through the barbed wire fence surrounding the property. That's when I noticed movement near the shoreline. I stopped and looked closer. Sitting right at the water's edge, with her feet dangling in, was a woman. I froze. How was she even there? The fence has no gaps that I've ever seen. It's topped with barbed wire and it's at least 10 feet tall. I must have made a sound. Maybe I gasped, because even from a distance, she suddenly turned and looked straight at me. Instantly, I knew it was the same woman from outside my window. The moment our eyes met, she stood up and ran toward the fence with a wild, unhinged expression. She pressed her face against the chain link and just stared at me, smiling. And it wasn't a normal smile, not even close. I shouted that I was calling the police, hoping it would scare her. Apparently it worked. As soon as I said it, she turned around and dove straight into the water. The way she did it felt wrong, unnatural, and I felt unsafe just being there. I called 911 immediately and tried to explain everything. I attempted to keep track of her, but she disappeared beneath the surface before the police arrived. When they showed up, they took my statement and said they'd check the area. They told me to continue my day as usual, which honestly surprised me. I haven't seen her since, but I've started hearing sounds outside my bedroom window at night. Not crying anymore, just the sound of someone moving around. It's made me extremely paranoid, and I can't shake the feeling that something else is coming. I've even been avoiding my runs because I'm terrified of encountering her again. I know the logical explanation is that she's mentally unstable and possibly followed me home after seeing me run one day. But what I can't explain is how she got inside that fenced-off area. My sister and I have searched for hours, trying to find a way in. There isn't one. It's impossible. My cousin Nick is a hardcore conspiracy theorist and insists the government is hiding something about that reservoir. I think that's ridiculous. Still, I've never felt more uneasy than I do inside my own home. My name is Jason, and I live in a fairly remote area where you have to drive at least 30 minutes to reach anything remotely entertaining. What I'm about to describe happened 3 Fridays ago. That night, my friend Leo and I drove a few towns over to attend a house party. It wasn't some wild blowout, just a laid-back get-together where people were hanging out in someone's backyard, playing beer pong and listening to music. It felt very college-like, honestly. But there isn't much to do where we live. I was the designated driver, so I spent the entire night slowly sipping the same beer for nearly 3 hours. Leo, on the other hand, did what he always does. Got louder, drunker, and increasingly philosophical as the night went on. By the time we left around 1 a.m., he was completely wasted. It was amusing at first, until it became clear that I'd turned into his unofficial caretaker. After finally pulling him away from the girl he'd been flirting with, I managed to get him into my car and started the 20-something-minute drive home. While we were at the party, the weather had taken a turn for the worse. What began as a light, refreshing drizzle had escalated into a heavy downpour. Visibility dropped to maybe 30 feet, forcing me to slow to around 30 miles per hour on roads I normally would have driven twice that fast. Leo complained nonstop. First about how I was driving, then about the music, and eventually about how badly he needed to use the bathroom. I told him we were no more than 15 minutes from home, but he wouldn't let it go. His whining became unbearable. After another 5 minutes of listening to him complain, I finally caved. I pulled over on a random stretch of road beside what looked like cornfields, though the rain and darkness made it hard to be sure. We were completely isolated. No houses, no street lights. Just farmland stretching out on both sides. I told him he could go relieve himself and get soaked for all I cared. But he was already halfway out of the car before I finished speaking. He practically tumbled out of the passenger seat and staggered toward the field, disappearing almost instantly. The rain was coming down so hard, I could barely see him once he was 10 feet away. The second he vanished, I remembered I had an umbrella in the back seat. I sat there for a moment with the engine running, then figured I might as well take advantage of the stop too. I grabbed the umbrella, locked the car out of habit, and walked in the opposite direction from where Leo had gone. I stopped about 20 yards from the car, right where the gravel shoulder met the crops. While standing there, I thought I heard something moving near the car, something that didn't match the constant roar of the storm. Without turning fully around, I glanced over my shoulder, but didn't see anything. I had the keys on me and knew the car was locked, so I brushed it off. When I finished and walked back, I was surprised to see Leo wasn't there yet. A couple minutes passed, then 5, then another 5. Still nothing. I was getting irritated. What should have been a quick drive home was turning into a 45-minute mess, and I needed to be up early the next day. I was just about to honk when I noticed movement in my side mirror. Leo came sprinting toward the passenger door. Even through the darkness and rain, I could tell something was very wrong. The moment he got inside, before he even shut the door, he started yelling at me to drive. Something instinctual kicked in, and I pulled away immediately. Between the storm and the conditions, speeding wasn't really an option, but I got us moving. As we drove, Leo explained that while he was relieving himself, he noticed someone he thought was me off to his right. The figure was walking deeper into the field. In his drunken state, Leo assumed I was messing with him or that I'd been drinking more than I admitted. So he followed the person without really thinking it through. He said he trailed them for a while, confused and too drunk to properly assess the situation. Eventually, the figure turned around, and Leo realized it absolutely wasn't me. He couldn't see any clear features, but it was unmistakably another person. His explanation took less than half a minute, but before he could even finish, I felt the car suddenly veer hard to the right. Immediately after, I heard the unmistakable sound of a tire blowing out. It was the worst possible timing. The car pulled so badly that continuing wasn't an option. With no choice, I pulled over. We were about half a mile from where we'd originally stopped, not close enough to feel safe, but not far enough to feel removed from whatever had happened. I yelled at Leo to get out and help since his bathroom break had caused all of this, but when I went to inspect the damage, my anger vanished instantly, replaced by sheer terror. A screwdriver was embedded deep into the sidewall of the rear passenger tire. There was absolutely no way it was accidental. Someone had deliberately jammed it in with force. Leo started panicking, but I snapped at him to pull it together. We rushed to change the tire in the pouring rain. I didn't want to think about who had done it or why, but the longer it took, the more my hands trembled. I felt like someone was going to appear out of the darkness at any second. The fear was overwhelming, so intense it made me feel sick. I was tightening the final lug nuts when a scream suddenly echoed from behind us. It was unmistakably a woman's scream, which made everything even worse, considering Leo said the figure he saw was male. I threw the tools into the trunk, abandoned the damaged tire, and jumped back into the car as fast as possible. As I started driving away, Leo grabbed my arm, insisting we had to go back because someone needed help. I told him there was no chance I was turning around, even though part of me felt like I was making the wrong call. Leo called 911 as we drove, giving the dispatcher our location as best he could. The entire ride home, Leo was furious, saying someone might be dying because we left. I couldn't bring myself to go back. I was terrified. I barely spoke until we pulled into my driveway. Instead of dropping Leo off, we sat there trying to process what had happened. Leo accused me of being a coward, but neither of us really knew what to think. Leo believed the scream came from someone being attacked or stalked by the person he had seen, and he felt horrible for not helping. I wasn't convinced. If someone was committing a crime out there, why would they draw attention by sabotaging a random car? That seemed completely counterproductive. And if there really had been a woman in distress, she would have seen our headlights when we first stopped. Why wait until after we left to scream for help? As I explained this to Leo, I finally put into words what had been nothing more than a gut feeling earlier. The scream might have been bait, part of some kind of trap. Maybe there was more than one person out there. But even that theory falls apart the more I think about it. Who would expect anyone to stop on that road at that hour, in that weather? Planning something like that seems almost impossible. Leo and I went back and forth for a long time before finally agreeing to disagree. The next morning, I contacted the police station to ask if they'd found anything. They told me officers had searched the area but found no signs that anyone had been there. Even stranger, they never found my tire either, which only added to the confusion, though I suppose it's possible they missed it. A few days later, Leo suggested another idea, that maybe it was actually the woman, not the man, who punctured my tire, trying to get our attention. Why she'd do that instead of screaming immediately, I have no idea. No explanation feels right to me. But the one thought I try hardest to avoid is the possibility that Leo is correct, that someone truly needed help that night. And by driving away, I sealed their fate.